Welcome. Such a pleasure to have you all. I will be probably admitting people as we're speaking, but I just wanted to make sure that we give ourselves plenty of time because I know there's a lot to talk about. So first and foremost, I wanted to thank my panelists, Brooke Ritchie Babbage, Malika Lawrence, and Kara Logan Berlin, who I think will be joining us shortly to answer your questions. So the way that this is going to work is that we'll do the first half, 30 minutes, sort of panel style that I have a couple of questions that I've queued up for our panelists. And then the second half will be more Q&A style. So if you have questions, feel free to pop it into the chat box on the right, and we will make sure to get to as many questions as we possibly can. But in the meantime, I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves and talk about the incredible expertise and experience that we have here today. So Malika, why don't we start with you, and then Brooke, we'll go to you. Great.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. My name is Malika Lawrence. I have been working in the nonprofit field for about 20 years now. Actually started out in direct service, working as a social worker, and pivoted into the world of development and leadership. I've worked for a number of types of organizations, everything from community-based after-school programs to national policy organizations, and across a wide variety of issues. I've had big teams, and I have been a team of one. So I've seen a good scope of experiences. Most recently, I'm working as a consultant, supporting nonprofits with a range of development strategy issues, board development, and planning, which comes in handy in times like this.
Great, thanks so much. Brooke?
Great. Hi. Thanks so much, Ria, for organizing this. I think it's a really exciting conversation. So my name is Brooke Ritchie Babbage. I have also been in this sector for about 20 years. I am a lawyer by training, and I started off here in the city doing public interest law, and then started a nonprofit and grew that organization and ran it for about 12 years. I will highlight, which I think is relevant to today's conversation, that year two-ish of the organization was 2008. And so just a very visceral understanding of what fundraising in a time of crisis looks like and feels like, and how you think about building relationships and planning and everything that we're going through now. So I ran that for a number of years, and then I stepped down about 3 years ago. And since then, I have done a few things. I am a consultant. I work primarily with emerging small and mid-sized organizations, so under $5 million, around organizational design, leadership coaching, and fundraising planning, strategic planning. I am a professor of social innovation and nonprofit leadership at the Brooks Graduate School of Public Affairs, and I am also the director of networks for the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation here in the city. So all things nonprofit, all things strategy, which is always tied up with fundraising. So I'm excited to talk about everything today.
Perfect. And I see that we have Kara here. Kara, would you mind introducing yourself a little and telling the folks who you are and the brilliance that you bring to the table?
You're very generous. I'm Carol.
Your sound a little bit low, my friend.
It is low. There we are. Sorry. I am, as many of you are probably experiencing, tremendous technical difficulties in the work from home game today. I am a development consultant. I run a firm called Harvest, and we work with nonprofits all the way from very small $500,000 organizations up to running strategy on a $1.6 billion capital campaign. I love to teach people how to raise money. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it is really important. I think we're seeing the importance of that really now. I think particularly through our relationships with individuals. And I think that what we do really matters and makes a difference. And I'm really proud to do it. And I love having conversations like this. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you. And for those of you who missed the intro, we are going to do 30 minutes of our panelists and then 30 minutes of Q&A. So if you have questions, don't be shy. Use that chat box and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So first question for our panelists. Title of this particular chat was, what about the money, honey? So I think the funding pool is going to be locked up a little bit in the next 12 months-ish. And so I'm wondering, not that you have a crystal ball, but based on your prior experience and best guess, where would folks look for funding within the next 6 to 12 months? And Kara, why don't we start with you?
You know, I said this a little bit in my intro, but I think at the end of the day, the only people that give you their money are individuals. So everybody else has to go through some sort of checks and balances, some sort of, you know, is this okay? Run it up the flagpole, which with individuals, if you've built relationships with them and share with them regularly where you are and what's happening, you have a better chance of them really backing what you're doing. I think for most nonprofits, the first place you should go in the situation is to your board to have a conversation with them. One, they're your partners in this. At the end of the day, your board is fiscally responsible for the health of the organization, so they have to know what's going on. But on top of that, these are people that have already deeply invested both financially and with time in what you do. And if you don't start there, if you don't start there, you're in trouble too once you move to the second pot of money, which is really the institutional giving, because they're going to say to you, what's your board doing?
Brooke, Malika, anything to add to that point?
Yeah, just I'll build on that. I think one of the things you highlighted, Kara, is the importance of sort of going to your current network. And I think really definitely in the next few months and probably for the next, 6 to 9 months, your current donors, people who have already given, the people who have already invested in you in some way, donors, funders, partners, are really the strongest place to start. To begin with, people who have given have already raised their hand and said, we care about what you're doing. And so going to them and saying, we're in this together, we're on the same team, you've invested in this mission and we need you now, resonates with people as part of sort of their identity. And also, as I'm sure those of you who are out in the world fundraising right now have seen, there can be a real tightening up, funders saying we're only going to give to existing grantees, et cetera. So really leveraging those current networks and contacts, I think, will be very important. And it's just get on the phone and have frank, honest conversations with folks.
And I'll add to the question of reaching out to institutional donors. There's a lot that they might be in the position to do now, particularly if you have large institutional donors that are real anchor funders who have been deeply invested in the work that you're doing. There might be ways that they can do a number of things, from accelerating payment schedules to offering more flexibility to some of the funding that you have. I've seen, in recent weeks, some foundations who have been willing to have their grantees convert their more project-based funds into general operating support, understanding that, these are organizations that they care about. They know that the landscape is going to change. So maybe the specific project that they thought they were going to fund might not happen in the way that they had imagined, or understanding that organizations may need cash now. So the payment that was supposed to come 6 months from now, maybe they can give that sooner to offer relief. So the importance of just reaching out, having those frank and honest conversations, sharing what your board is doing, sharing what you're doing as an organization to manage risk at the time is a nice way to start that conversation with those institutional funders about what they can do to support you now.
And actually, I just want to add one quick thing to that. Don't be afraid to talk about your next fiscal year. I think one of the concerns that a lot of the organizations that I work with are having is, even if they have a runway for this fiscal year, that means they're not so much in crisis, everybody's going to be hit next year. And so in those frank, honest conversations, don't be afraid to be honest and say, could you guarantee us another year, right? We were supposed to cycle off. Can we talk about that not happening? And bring them into that thinking now.
That's a great point. One thing that I'm wondering about is none of you mentioned corporate. And so I'm wondering, is that a dead goose? Like, what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a dead goose. I mean, I'd like to say it isn't, but so much of corporate giving either comes from a marketing budget, which is always the first thing to get cut, or it comes from profits. So it's a much harder, unless you have something really large scale that really affects a lot of people, that is very specific to relief aid. It's a very hard sell right now. Also, because so much of corporate partnership, there's the three pots of corporate money. There's corporate social responsibility, which is really out of the marketing budget, which is usually smaller. Corporate foundations, which are traditional foundations, which are usually managed by different people. And then there's the partner managing director money, which is where all the real money lies, which those are the people that tell you, oh, we don't do events. And you're like, that's weird because you have a table at every event in the city. It's from that pot. But all of those people and all of those decisions have to run through a bunch of people. And they usually have some sort of hinge on how you're going to engage with employees, volunteer engagement things, or naming or branding, or all sorts of things that don't really exist right now. Although I think you could probably get creative trying to come up with like the COVID-19 package that includes like how many times we'll do you on social media, how we'll profile you on the website, and all of the ways that you can do it from afar. But it's a much harder fight for the gift than the other two pots are right now, at least in my opinion. Malika, Brooke, what do you think?
I agree. Dead goose.
Yeah.
Dead goose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
All right. All right, goose cooked. Don't even look at corporate right now. Okay, let me switch tacks a little bit, because I think to your point, Kara, we're very sensitive about messaging and wanting to make sure that we don't come off as callous. But we know a lot of the funding right now is very COVID related and focused at like basic health and basic human services. And I'm wondering, at what point would it be okay to start talking about your cause if it doesn't seem to be directly related to health? So say maybe an education organization or an arts organization. And Malika, let's start with you.
Sure. I think that you can continue to raise money for your mission. I think just, again, paying attention to messaging and how you do that. Your organization will still be working to serve the population that it needs to serve. And especially in our most vulnerable communities, the need is going to be even bigger because of everything that's going on. So I don't think that you stop because the work of the organization doesn't stop and the need doesn't stop. But I think what you do is think about how you can articulate that to your donors. You talk about, you can't communicate in a way that doesn't exist in that context, right? That would look tone deaf, and you can't send out your scheduled campaign stuff that is happy and shiny when we're in the midst of a situation like this one. But what you can do is reach out to your donors, ask how they're doing, and be really frank about what's happening. This is how we're seeing this impact our community. Here are the things that we're looking to do to continue our important work and to support our community that's impacted in this way. You mentioned the example of education. While a school may not be a healthcare provider, education's been completely upended. As someone who is homeschooling right now, my room might go full BBC Dad. My kids might bust in at any minute. Education is hugely important. And I have really appreciated hearing from my son's school about the fact that they are distributing laptops and hotspots and meals, that they are taking care of their own staff, and hearing about just all the ways that they're responding makes me understand why the school community is so important. So I think the same can be said for other organizations that are not directly related to health. You still ask, but you ask in the context of what's happening now, and you kind of address what it is that you're doing.
Yeah. I think to build on that, Malika, one of the things that you mentioned that you really resonate with is how concrete your school has been. And so I think I'd say two things in response to your question, Ria. One is every nonprofit is hit in ways that are different based on their mission, and also the same based on the fact that they're institutions that are hurting right now, or that are nervous. And so whether you are a health organization or a homeless service organization or an education or an arts, you all have people on your team whose jobs you're trying to protect. You all have communities that are hit in some way by this pandemic. And so I think one strategy that I've seen work well that never feels tone deaf is to focus really concretely on the operational aspects of the fundraising. We are raising money because in order to make sure our organization stays afloat, we don't want to let go of our team, right? We cannot lose this community space that we've been invested in. So there are concrete operations that you can ask people to invest in that aren't off mission, right? So it's not mission creep, but it's perhaps maybe a little more of an insider look into what it takes to carry out your mission. And I know everybody's thinking about payroll right now. So that concreteness is the first thing. And the second thing that I would say is just going back to a point that was made earlier, the people who have already donated, invested, et cetera, they buy your mission. They share your vision of what makes this world a healthy, happy, socially just place. And so, if I'm giving to an education institution, I don't actually need them to call me in a time of crisis and ask for money for health. I gave to them because I believe that part of what I want the world to look like when we get to the end of this pandemic includes a robust education system. I've already said I believe in that vision. And so really leaning into that shared vision and helping them understand how investing now will allow you to stay afloat to achieve that shared vision, I think can be really powerful.
And Kara, did you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, just to piggyback on it, I think it's really important, the specificity. So if you're saying to them, and I think numbers and things people can wrap their heads around right now is really helpful. So saying to them, listen, we have 140 staff, 72 are part-time, whatever the other math is the others. And, our full-time and part-time, all of the part-time staff are after school summer people, or if you're an arts organization, they deliver classes, or it's our dance company, or all of these things and they're off the road. And if you run an arts organization and you were doing a special exhibition, you've lost that earned income, but you still have to pay the staff that works in the museum, and they're on union hours, and you have to pay them, and it costs an extra $130,000 a week that we aren't making back in earned income. Letting them understand what it means to keep these people employed and why we do it and why we're committed to do it, and we're going to do it as long as we can. But we are no longer having our gala, which we thought was a $2 million gala. So we've lost $2 million between now and June 30th. And we have an added $3 million in costs that we did not anticipate. And we don't know if we're doing the summer program. So help. I think it's the more you can show them why there's a need, because I'm seeing, even with my clients, their boards, this is a really interesting time, because you think your board knows what you do, but newsflash, they don't. They say things like, yeah, we do great things with kids and foster care. You're like, that's what you think we do? So, I have a lot of clients whose board was like, you just need to close. And they're like, we're literally an essential service provider. We don't close. We have 200 teens in housing we run. So it's a good time to educate them on really what it means to do this work and to do it well and to take it all the way. And then it's much easier for them to consider making a gift. And you're right, Brooke. I mean, they already picked you. They joined your board. They've been big donors. They already picked you, and all these other places already existed too that they could have picked. They could have picked more direct social service organizations to become involved with. They picked you when the world always has needs. So they're going to pick you again. They just need to understand why.
That's a beautiful point. For those out there listening, prepare your questions. We're going to open it up in about 10 minutes. But let me piggyback on this point, ladies, because I think the point is clear, which is we should be in communication with our boards. We should be talking to our constituents. We should be talking to our staff. Can you offer any concrete, actionable advice around what does the cadence look like? Because I do also know that people are a little bit inundated with lots of information right now via email and various other media. So I'm just wondering, and Brooke, we can start with you. Do you have any concrete advice about how often should we be communicating? When should we be communicating? Through what medium should we be communicating, and what should we be communicating?
Well, there are a lot of questions in there. I guess I'll speak.
You went to Harvard. You can handle it. Come on, girl.
That was a long time ago. I'm older now. My brain is, different. But so I'll speak most concretely about the board and sort of the donor piece. Actually, my first piece of advice globally is you want to communicate clearly and as concrete things really shift. So when you're communicating with your board, when you're communicating with major donors, and I don't know that this is the case for all donors because many donors donate to lots of organizations, so they're getting lots of communication, and institutional funders. As you do your scenario planning and reach points of inflection, right? Oh, now I'm at a position where if X amount of money doesn't come in, we will have to let go of staff. Now I'm at a position where our programming is really going to have to structurally shift. Those key moments of inflection are really good times to communicate with your board because to Kara's point, they are specific and they highlight this is what's happening in the organization right now. And I was saying before we got on the call that I heard a really great framework for communicating people, programs, and profit, right? There are 3 buckets. And that organizing communication into those 3 buckets and then really figuring out in your ecosystem who can help you address those inflection points in each of those buckets and communicating with them, I think is a really great concrete way to map out the communication. And then I think identifying 1 or 2 point people in those buckets so you don't actually have to communicate with your whole donor list or all of your board members all the time about everything. Certain people are going to be helpful to you around certain decisions you have to make and certain pieces of information you need. And so communicating mostly with them. And then third, seeing if you can streamline communication. So one of the things, I'm the chair of an organization here in the city called Community Resource Exchange, which I just want to put a shout out. CRE is amazing and they're offering a lot of like real-time scenario planning. Yeah, they're great. I've loved them for 15 years. But one of the things that I'm trying to do with our board and our CEO is be a point person. And so we have 3 people on our board that are point people for specific types of information. So the board isn't constantly getting these general updates. It's, okay, you are the finance point person. If there is something about finance that needs to be communicated, I'm going to really lean into you to figure out the cadence and the key information. And so both as a nonprofit leader, that helps not to have to worry about doing these sort of generalized updates, but also as someone receiving the information, you're getting information that is most relevant to you. I'm getting the finance information, or I'm getting the marketing information, et cetera.
That's a great tip. Kara, Malika, any other thoughts on that?
I think having a weekly call with your board, the clients I know that are doing this well, I have one client that has a Sunday night 7:30 call, and about 70% of his board shows up every Sunday night. And in between, he really speaks to his executive committee, right? He talks to his board chair, he talks to his development chair, he talks to the finance and the audit and the risk people on the regular basis. But they just to say, these are the decisions we made this week. This is where we're at. This is how we've done it. And the board leads part of that. Now, I don't think everyone has a board that shows up like that, right. But it's a good thing to try to do. I do think you should call every single person on your board, and you should pick a threshold, of your major gift donors and assign them throughout the organization and do a wellness check on every person. Just I always think that the key to fundraising is that you act like a real normal human person to other people. So if these are people that have been giving to you forever and you've checked in on them and you know them and you have relationships over time, wouldn't you just check in on them? So I think making sure that someone calls them at least once to be just checking in to see how you are. We have a lot of stuff going on. but mainly, how are you, so that you're still here for us when we need you. We can be here for you too. It's got to go both ways. And I think really thinking about your website, just as a place where you can shine some of this. It also keeps your team working on something and actively thinking and being creative in those hours that they're alone and they're not sure how to add value. So collecting stories, getting them on the website, thinking, I don't think emailing people all the time is good. I think having a regular weekly or like twice a month communication is all anyone. I mean, I know what my inbox looks like. So making sure that the subject just says, 5 wins for the Shepherd Services this week, something like that. Which I think will at least maybe get someone to open it, because right now when it ends up in their inbox, all they think, which is all they think whenever they get anything from us, is they want more money. So let's make it easy.
Yeah.
At least maybe.
And Malika, that's a beautiful dovetail, because I know that you've spoken a bit about staff communication and how to really help support staff, particularly development staff, through these times. So if you could speak to that a little bit, that'd be great.
Sure. When I was invited to participate, one of the things that I said was, I think, really important for development teams, and if you're a development team of one, still important, is to just take a beat to check in on yourself and to check in with your team. Like Brooke, I was working in development in New York in 2008. Actually, it's my very first day as director of development of the full department, as opposed to just one arm of development, was the same day that Lehman Brothers closed, and was a week before our Gulf outing. So that was a good time.
Good old days.
Good old days. But one thing that I vividly remember that stuck with me was coming into the office and finding one of my staff members looking at her prospect list and crying silently at her desk. I sat with her to talk with her. And what I realized was that she had really personalized and internalized a lot of the external anxiety. And she felt personally responsible for whether or not her team members kept their jobs. And it was important for us as a team to come together to demonstrate that we were there to support each other, that things were burning down around us financially, but that no one person was responsible for the entire financial success of the organization, that we were a part of a team and a collaborative, that we would sit down, revisit our development plan, make changes, do what we've been talking about, kind of divide up our donor and our board list, make those calls, come back together, and just continue to work the plan together. And I just did a lot of checking in with my team regularly around that time, realizing how much anxiety they carried and realizing how much I carried. And so it's, I think, a good time to really practice some good team dynamics and self-care, so that everyone understands that we're in it together.
Can I actually just piggyback off of that really briefly? I just want to reiterate, I just love that you said that. I was on a call earlier this week with a dear friend of mine who's the executive director of a nonprofit here. They're maybe 2.5 million. And what she was saying was, as the executive director, everyone on her team has turned to her board, her staff, even some of her donors, and they have said, how are you going to lead us out of this crisis? And so, I think that anyone in any kind of leadership position that has anything to do with fundraising, those eyes turn to you. And it can be particularly hard if you are the executive director, because people really, they're like, you're stewarding the ship, help us, help us. And so just remembering what Malika said, that even if you are the executive director, it is still not all on your shoulders, that fundraising should always be, and maybe one of the silver linings of this crisis is that it will move organizations to the point where they remember that it is never a one-person job. It is always a team effort. Your board, your staff, not just your development staff, your ambassadors, et cetera, and showing yourself some grace in this time, you know.
Great, thank you. So now we're actually going to open it up for questions. So I don't know if anyone in the audience has a question. It might be a free for all. This will be fun, but oh, fun. Okay, we'll start with this. Nicole, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole McCauley. I'm the Director of Recruitment and Diversity Initiatives at SEO. Just looking for some suggestions or best practices on hosting virtual gala events. Our event was scheduled to take place later this month, and we initially were going to cancel, then postpone, but then decided to host a virtual event, and just wanted to get any suggestions or thoughts from the group.
So I just attended a really great virtual gala event that I can speak to. So there's a theater organization here in New York City called Opening Act, and their annual event is a play reading. It's on Broadway. It's really just a joyous event. And so even before we were all quarantined, Broadway shut down. So they've known for quite some time that that was not going to happen. And they pivoted pretty quickly, and there were a few elements of the event that just made it was actually really successful financially. You know, they didn't make everything they had planned because it is virtual, but did much better than, quite frankly, I think anybody expected. And so the three things I'll highlight: one, they were really, and I don't know if this is like a best practice, it just worked with this particular organization, but they were really sort of earnest about the context. And Malika, you talked about the context earlier. They didn't try to pretend that they were doing a virtual event that was sort of just in a normal time. The theme was joy, and it was very much in response to, this is a time, you know, where we all need a little joy. So they engaged directly with the context. So everybody showed up sort of feeling like they were part of the same team and experience. They leveraged existing contacts. So a lot of the people who were going to be speakers and presenters and readers in the play, in the actual play reading, they said, will you join a Zoom event and read a poem, speak to your experience with the organization? So they reached out to a number of the same people that were going to be part of their event in the real world and made that virtual. They also got a lot of their young people to just sort of speak into the camera. And because it's Zoom and it feels like you're sort of all in a conversation, that was really powerful. Probably in certain ways more powerful than if those same young people had been up on a stage, because, you know, I was sitting in my kitchen with my two little boys and we were sort of listening to a conversation with young people that had gone through their programs, explaining how this event meant something to them and how the organization meant something to them. And then the last thing they did was they made the ask really explicit. They made it really clear, this is our fundraising event. It looks different, we're trying it, you know, be gracious if our tech goes wrong, but we are raising money and for this reason. And, you know, you had to donate to attend. They had a raffle. So I think just the earnestness, the honesty, and the human element, they really leaned into those, and that it was really financially successful for them.
Great. Kara, Malika, do you have any other thoughts to add around virtual events and galas?
You know, I'm seeing a lot of different models because, right, this is gala season. This is the time when everyone was planning these types of events. And one thing that I've seen, you know, when there isn't necessarily a performance element or something that could be presented virtually, organizations who have sent out an ask that, you know, thank you so much for your support, you know, kind of again mentioning the context and the reason why they've had to pivot their plans, and asking if people would consider, you know, making a donation in lieu of purchasing a ticket. My alma mater has done that in addition to putting their auction online. So a lot of the experiences that they secured, they were able to still have the online auction piece, but ask people, you know, would you be willing to convert your ticket into a fully tax deductible donation? and here's how it will help us continue to cultivate this school community moving forward. I'm seeing that people are really just having to get creative, and again, using some of those tactics that we've talked about previously about being very concrete about the need, being concrete about the organization's response, and being clear that the need continues and that you would appreciate gifts from the people who support you at that time.
Kathleen Rubenstein, I see that you have a question about email outreach and communication. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Hi, thank you all so much. I'm obviously a consumer of many of these emails, as we all are these days, and I think I have Kara's perception that I'm like, all right, who's hitting me up today and why? And so I do wonder if there's a space or a development benefit to having the occasional email be like really and purely an update email, or if that's coming from a place for me of like discomfort with money and that actually there's always room for development. So I wanted your insights. Thank you all very much.
Kara, I think that one was straight to you. I know you've got thoughts about that. Did we lose Kara? Kara, you here?
You're muted.
Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted. Thank you. I think, I think it really depends on how good of a job you've done with the personal outreach leading up to it. I think if you've talked to everyone that are your key donors that you're really expecting, let's say 80 or 90% of the support that's coming in, if you've already done your wellness checks there and you've kept the conversation going, then having that be included in the outreach is fine. I think, below a certain threshold, it's totally fine as well. If we're looking at $1,000 and below for more of a grassroots gift to say, please help us continue it, consider making a gift today. But I think you have to acknowledge within that, if you are including some sort of ask, saying there are a lot of things happening in the world and there are a lot of places to give and there is no shortage of need, and this is what we're doing in this window of time to take care of our communities and take care of the people that we serve, and we hope that you'll consider supporting us now. So I think acknowledging it, I think Malika said that earlier, like not having it be in a vacuum where you're like, let me tell you about our highlights. It's important to say, this is what we're doing. And if you want the ask in saying, we're so grateful for you and we hope that you'll consider making an additional gift.
All right, I'm going to go kind of fast and furious now because the questions are coming in. So Jenny Wolfson, I see that you have a question about donor and donor conversations. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. This is so helpful. So my question is, we have 60% major donors, big hitters on our board, and it's quite hard to get them on the phone. So I think I will get many of them on the phone and have been, but I'm not sure I'll get them on the phone a second time. And I think people are quite overwhelmed with talking to family, friends, work. And so my question is, if I call up to find out how someone's doing, when do I actually call them up and say, please, can you make sure you give this year or give more or multi-year or whatever the ask is? We're sort of trying to work out how to do that sensitively, knowing also that many individual donors have been, quite heavily hit, obviously, by the market and everything else that's going on, and some of them being older, concerned about their own health and all that.
I think that if it's a board member, it's a very different conversation, because I think if it's a board member, you have to update them on what you're doing to make sure that you are able to make your budget or get as close as possible. And I think it's good to frame it so they don't feel so directed to one individual. So saying, listen, our first line of defense here is to talk to everyone on the board. It's to close any outstanding gifts we have where people are able to do that. It's to talk to and you can always start with foundations. Say, we're talking to every foundation. We're asking them to make gifts now, even if they're not supposed to pay now. We're asking them to move towards general operating support. We're trying to get them to commit to the same level for next year. And with individuals, we're touching base with every individual of $1,000 and over. And with our board, we're having conversations with everyone on, if you are willing to make an additional gift this year, would you consider it? If you have an outstanding pledge, would you please fulfill it? So making it like, these are our broad ways that we're doing that, and then wait for their feedback. Then leave a bunch of nice open space and sit there breathing until they respond.
Love that. Silence is your friend. Brooke, Malika, any additional thoughts?
I might just add that I think that same cadence will probably work with your major donors also, right? So if you are concerned about getting them on the phone twice, I mean, obviously their relationship to the organization is different than a board member, but that same, here's where we are, wanted to check on you, bring you into the fold, have a human conversation. And as you probably would with any friend, and let me tell you a little bit about what's going on, you know, and what we're trying to do to shore up these gaps that we're seeing. And I'd love to have a conversation with you now or at a better time about how you might be able to support us. If they've already made a pledge, you know, are you comfortable confirming that pledge, right? So you don't, I guess you can also just say, have the honest conversation, or not, it's all honest. The first part of the conversation, the human sort of checking in conversation. And if that isn't the right time given the person, because some people you can actually do both in the same call and they're fine. But if that's not right for that particular donor, you can say, and I would love to get back on the phone in a couple weeks when things have calmed down and have a conversation about X. And maybe that's how you can bridge that gap to try to sort of secure a second call.
And I think that's one of the benefits of actually getting on the phone and doing calls as opposed to sending correspondence through email, because it really, you know, sometimes the emails are easier to crank out and cut and paste and send. But if you get someone on the phone and you do the first part of the conversation where you're checking in with them, and you know, you can just feel, or you hear kind of a life update, and you can feel them out and see how things are going, or if they've had a really bad experience, you know, they're affected really personally. You know, you can kind of pivot and you can make the conversation, take the conversation in a different direction if you need to. But I think, again, it speaks to the value of those personal touches as opposed to sending out email requests.
Yeah, it's always a good reminder that we tend to over rely on email communication. So we have a question coming in from Miss Molly about engaging your board, especially if they're not a heavy hitter board. And so Molly, why don't you unmute yourself and ask? And actually, I'd love for Brooke to jump in first, because I think it's most relevant to her experience having grown a grassroots organization.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is such a gift. I'm so grateful, Ria, and to each of you fabulous, brilliant women. Yeah, you know, I feel like we were already in a beautiful space of change and growth with our board in an exciting way. But I know some folks already weren't able to commit to the $5,000 gift get we have, and the $2,500 for those who are grandfathered in. So I would love any insight you have, Brooke. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think, you know, one of the themes that Malika and Kara have really touched on today that I think is important to keep in mind in all of this is relationships. That particularly now when we can't see one another, really leaning into relationships, I think, is going to be the key to getting us through to the other side. And so, you know, as Ria mentioned, I, you know, started off with a board of 3, and I would not say that my early years were, you know, heavy hitting. They were very committed people, but I don't know that I would say in the early years they were so heavy hitting. And so what I really focused on with them, particularly in the sort of 2008 to say 2010 time when everything was a little bit topsy-turvy, was that the board that I had, one of the things they always did bring to the table that I really valued was a connection to communities I cared about. And sometimes those were grassroots communities or the young people communities where the young people that we worked with came from. Sometimes they were corporate communities. They were communities of types of donors that, you know, I might not be as close to, but they each had their own network. And when we talk about fundraising, we always talk about sort of tapping our networks, and it can sound really schmarmy, but it isn't really. What that is saying right now, a lot of how we're going to know how to navigate this from a messaging perspective and how we're going to know where our supporters are sort of on the other end is by staying in touch with them. And one of the things you guys can do right now, board, maybe you can't give the $5,000, But we would love to sort of deploy you in your networks, in your communities, be our eyes and ears on the ground. I, as the executive director, the development director, development team, I can't reach out to every person who's impacted by COVID-19 in our ecosystem, but you guys can help us do that. And so Kara had mentioned weekly check-ins with your board. This can help them feel really useful. In between this week's call and next week's call, it would be great if you could reach out to 10 people in your network, whether they are donors or not. And I actually see some of the questions here on the chat are about sort of cultivating new donors, and now is sort of a weird time to do that. But relationship building never ends. And so they may not be a heavy hitting board in terms of writing their own checks, but I do think being explicit and targeted about, and I hate the word deploy because it sounds technical, but really encouraging them to be eyes and ears on the ground, to reach out to 10 people a week that are in their network that might not have the up-to-date information about what's actually happening in our organization. Now is an amazing time to activate your board as ambassadors. And so I am just, I'm a really huge fan, particularly for, say, organizations under $5 million, of micro donations. And sometimes that's like $10 and sometimes it's $50. It depends on what micro means. But they're essentially donations that ambassadors help you bring in. So this is a really great way to use a board that perhaps has other strengths and skills besides writing a big check. Turn them into ambassadors out there in the world, sharing the concrete information about the need that your organization is facing, sharing the concrete information about how the people in their network can help, and perhaps encouraging them to bring in micro, smaller donations. It also means when you get to the end of this pandemic, you may actually have grown your network of support in a way that feels authentic.
Beautiful. I'm actually thinking about like inception, like you incept in their heads the mission, and then you have them go, and maybe talking about viruses is not the great time to do it, but to go viral.
I like ambassadors. Maybe not viruses right now.
Kara, sorry, did you say something?
No, that was a child.
We're all in it.
Locked in a room.
Hi.
I'll be back.
All right. Malika, do you have any other thoughts?
Like I said, same thing could happen on my end. So just be warned. One of the things I just really love about that concept, and I think it applies during a time of crisis and beyond. You know, one of the things we talked about before is that your board might not be as familiar with the mechanics of your work as you may have thought they were previously. So it's a really specific ask. You're telling your board how they can be helpful, you know, clearly in an exchange and sharing ideas, but, you know, bringing in a set of ambassadors and telling them kind of the part of their network, really giving some guidance, particularly for board members who aren't necessarily big donors or heavy hitters in that way. I think it's helpful, and it really puts them in a position to feel like they can go out and do something that's for the good of the organization. So I think it applies to crisis times and any time, you know, that you can help your board understand what would be most helpful and work with them on and support them in their efforts to do that. I think that's a good approach.
Awesome. Stephanie, you have a question about the new reboot of Giving Tuesday. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. So first I want to say this has been wonderful. I mean, I am a kind of a one-person development shop, plus staying at home and working remotely has like amplified it even more. So I just love hearing all of you guys and your advice, and then, you know, my colleagues who are asking questions. So thank you, Ria, and everyone for putting this on. So Chronicle Philanthropy the other day announced rebooting Giving Tuesday with this Giving Tuesday Now campaign, which is supposed to launch on May 5th. And, you know, we, in my organization, we have a pretty strong group of major donors that support Giving Tuesday, and just being sensitive to like how to leverage that. I mean, I think it's, you know, an interesting idea. And it's not, and it seems to be not just for organizations that are on the front line, but just trying to get people to think about all nonprofits that may be impacted by this crisis, and trying to just kind of put something out there to help everyone. But I'm like on the fence about, especially on the major donor side, like, you know, after Thanksgiving, we will be asking them, because that's when they generally give for Giving Tuesday, and then to ask them now, like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'd love to hear some thoughts on, you know, this new idea or new Giving Tuesday.
I have some feelings about Giving Tuesday, but panelists, your thoughts.
I mean, I don't love Giving Tuesday in general, which I know puts me in like a weird spot, but I think it gives everybody a chance to give you the smallest possible gift they think they can get away with, which is what you get when you have more anonymous asks. But here's what I do think. Nobody gives you their last dollar, and nobody gives you the most they possibly can unless they've been asked face to face in a major gift ask.
Yeah.
So, and you know, you're not going to get a worse pandemic, knock on wood. So those people that have made a gift to you at Giving Tuesday will be inclined to make another gift now, I think. And I don't think it will be a choice for them of one or the other. Now things can are financially, and maybe it's a much smaller gift, but I don't think people are thinking, should I make this gift now or the one in November? I think everyone recognizes it's a unique opportunity for need, that they're to be like, I can give a little something.
Right. I'll add to that. I too have feelings about Giving Tuesday. Seems there's some consistency. But the thing that really stood out, Stephanie, about what you said was that you have a group of major donors who get excited about it. And so it could be a scenario where you reach out and engage with those donors. And if they're excited about Giving Tuesday in the fall, you know, there's a way that they can get excited and ignited around this initiative now and the need that your organization has now. So I see it almost in the context of a major donor touch point opportunity, and that's the real opportunity, as opposed to just the giving, the initiative of giving.
I love that.
And I just want to just highlight that the sort of theme there is authenticity. Like, everybody knows that we're in a pandemic. So I don't think that there's any donor that would be at all surprised by you, sorry, that's my phone, by you saying, hey, there's one now, there's going to be another one in November. Could we talk about both? And maybe their answer is no, maybe they can't do it. I think most off, just have that honest conversation, because everybody knows where we are, right? Yeah.
Also, you didn't launch Giving Tuesday. Giving Tuesday launched Giving Tuesday.
Right, that's true.
Sent out to your donors and been like, guess what? It's Gift in May. It would be a lot more obnoxious. So you have to cover there, which is good.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we have time for one last question from Aisha about engaging new prospects, because as you know, we mentioned the giving and the fundraising just don't stop. So go ahead, Aisha.
Hi, thank you all. So yeah, I just would love to hear any advice on engaging new prospects. Our organization doesn't have a lot of major donors, very few actually, and so we recently had an event and we had some great prospects come out of it, and we had all sorts of fun follow-up plans that are now changing, obviously. And so curious just on thoughts of how to continue to engage these people, and is it our fiscal year ends at the end of June, and is there a way to ask them for support when we're just starting a relationship and we're not able to engage with them in site visits and things that might feel more meaningful?
Great question. Who wants in on that one?
I'll jump in. You know, it sounds like you had this event and you had a lot of great follow-up plans. I think those plans can still happen, just likely in a different sort of way. And again, acknowledging the context, even saying, you know, so excited and grateful for your participation in the event. I've been really, you know, I've been in touch with a lot of people this week where I've said, I was really looking forward to that coffee, and then coffee person was not a thing. But scheduling some, Zoom, FaceTime or something to check in and to make some connections. I think, again, we're functioning in a different context. We have to be creative, but the follow-up and the relationship building can continue. I think also, something that Brooke said earlier about now being the time to deploy your major donors and your board members as ambassadors. You can say, we had prospected, X amount of dollars coming in from new donors. Here's who in your network it would really be helpful for you to tap. And kind of come up with some goals and regular check-in and offering support for them as they do that. So I think, again, as we said, there's no shortage of need. The work will still continue. The need is compounded in some ways, in every way, by our current situation. And really kind of starting with your inner circle of anchor and core supporters, like your board and your major donors, and asking them how they can help you reach other potential people who would be jazzed up about your mission. I've also had some good experiences with institutional funders at times like this, reaching out to anchor foundation supporters and saying, you've invested in these big plans that we have. Because we weren't able to have our gala or participate in fundraising in the way that we thought, are there other foundations we might talk to, or other folks that who are giving emergency funds right now? Oftentimes foundations can be iffy about stuff like that, but in the current situation, particularly if you have foundations that you have really strong relationships with, asking them for those connections or for their advice of other institutions and, again, collaborative and community funds, places that you can go. I think that's a perfectly acceptable way to reach some new potential funders.
I think one thing I'll add to that is just to build on what you were saying earlier, like about finding ways to bring people in. I think that particularly for organizations that aren't, say, arts organizations or youth organizations, where visual media is part of how you think about your programming and part of how you bring people in, where it's sort of a site visit in a physical place or to a program is how we're used to thinking about engaging prospects in our work. Really thinking creatively and letting go of the part of us it's like, but that feels unprofessional, or that feels like it was just thrown together, or how are they really going to get a sense for our programs if it's virtual? Sort of maybe pausing that voice and finding creative ways to showcase what you're all about in a virtual space. And so I've seen this work well. Organizations sort of pivoting and saying, okay, we had these panel discussions with our executive directors and sort of leaders in our sector. And so we're going to host a Zoom fireside chat. And it's just our ED on a screen and a person that our prospective donors that's in our ecosystem might really care about. And they're going to have a conversation. So the same kind of programming that you might introduce, think creatively with your team about what are one or two ways we can still show prospective donors, still invite them in, that maybe is a coffee with one of us, or maybe is a Zoom event, or a Google Hangout with some of the people who are impacted in our community, or something like that. And I know it can feel really weird, but that still is cultivation. Cultivation is just about bringing people in into your space, and that will resonate with them.
So friends, unfortunately, out of time right now, and I want to be respectful of our panelists. I invite anybody who wants to stick around a little bit longer. I have more time. I don't know if our panelists do, but I just want to make sure that we get you out when we say that we will. Really appreciate everybody on the call, and particularly to our panelists, Kara, Brooke, Malika, you guys fully delivered. Fundraising Team LeBron. I will make sure that this video is available on the event website that on LinkedIn, and we'll also make sure that the ladies on the panel are, the contact information is available if you want to get in touch with them. Last thoughts, Brooke, Kara, Malika, anything to close us out?
I would say I think everybody really wants to make a difference right now and have value, whether they are a board member or a donor or a staff member or your team. and everybody is frayed, no matter how much money they have or how little money they have or how much help they have at home or how much zero help they have at home or how bad they are at teaching math to their kids. I think everybody is really on edge right now and exhausted. And I always say, like, I don't believe you should ration gratitude. And even the people that are closest to you, that are responsible for keeping you afloat, make sure that you thank them, that they feel that they know what you need from them, and that you're grateful and that you're genuinely grateful for it. And then make sure you take some time for yourself and allow your teams and your staff and your partners and your bosses and everybody, be generous with each other. It's a really hard time.
Thank you to all of you. Have a wonderful weekend. Good luck. Stay safe, stay healthy. And we're actually going to be back next week with Leading Through Change on Wednesday with Dr. Lisette Nieves. So if you all want to join, that's going to be an awesome chat too. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Be well.